Welcome back to Proof of Culture, and have we got a treat for you today? I'm speaking with Natalie Crue. Natalie is a cultural producer, a consultant, a global hip hop connoisseur, and an activist. She sees arts and culture as a vehicle for social change, and she's been spearheading various cultural brand and social impact initiatives around the globe that aim to foster civic engagement, spark dialogue, and amplify communities. Natalie co-developed the Metaverse Music Festival, the first global music festival rooted in the metaverse. She co-produces Huelas Festival in southern Spain and contributes to a number of DAO and creative communities in the Web3 ecosystem. Recently, she founded Web3 Uncut, which is a tech lab building micro experiments to support creators on chain, and a newsletter centering on Web3 arts and culture. Natalie is what I would say one of the most distinctive voices in Web3. And I know Natalie from the Clubhouse days, where whenever you saw Natalie was in a room, you know that room was going to be off the chain. And so it is my great pleasure to be able to chat with her today. We talk about why the music industry cannot be reformed and why it needs to be dismantled to create a new system. And we just talk about how art in and of itself is a social movement and how Web3 can facilitate that. So this is a top-notch conversation. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Natalie on Proof of Culture. Natalie, thank you for joining us on Proof of Culture. It's great to have you. As we ask all of our guests, I'm going to ask you, what is your origin story? How did you make it here to Web3? I think I read or I listened to something where you said that you've been in Web3 before it was Web3. So tell us all about that and how you got to this space.
First of all, thank you for having me. In terms of how I got to Web3, long story short, what had happened was, so I've been involved in a bunch of different industries and communities, and I've been building communities since I can remember. I've been on the internet since the 90s. I'm not going to tell my age. And so along the way, I met this guy Vandal, him and this guy DJ Lethal Skills, who's an OG DJ from Lebanon. Vandal's this guy from Canada, both of them are super deep in hip hop globally. And so I met them very randomly, and they were doing some social token stuff in Malaysia around music. And I'm like, what are y'all doing? At that time, I was running some festivals and building a bunch of communities on Facebook and other places on the internet, and couldn't get funding for any of this stuff because unless you want to play the quote unquote game, which I wasn't willing to do. So they're like, you need to come check out this NFT social token stuff. And I'm like, don't know what you're talking about, although I'm nerdy and super into tech, but I will check it out. And so that's how I ended up in the whole NFT thing and learning about social tokens. Actually, fast forward maybe to 2018, he was about to launch DAO Records, which was the first record label on chain. And so had some conversations with him. But during that time, I'd been navigating NFTs and all these emerging technologies. And that's how I ended up here before Web3. And the rest is a longer story. So.
And what year was that?
I found out about social tokens and all this stuff around 2016, 17. But I think it was around 2018 to 2020 where I actually deep dived and actually existed here. And so, that's how I got here. So
that was well before I came in I think 2020, which is when a lot of us came in the middle of COVID. What was the space like at that time when you entered? I'm assuming that it probably is a lot like it is today, which is not very diverse or inclusive, but just wondering from your vantage point, what did it look like?
I always tell people that I always lived in a strange pocket. Shout out to the cat for the ad libs. I always lived in a strange pocket of Web3, NFTs, and the people that I surrounded myself around were mostly musicians. So historically, that space has always been super kind of diverse and a bunch of different thoughts and all of that. And so I would say If you look at the greater NFT space, maybe it wasn't as diverse, but I would say it was definitely more
Mm,
welcoming, definitely less, and I don't mean this in a bad way because I love my degens, but it was less like the degenerate kind of behavior, and people are really like about trying to onboard artists and share resources. And so it was just a really different world back then. And again, I
hmm.
live in a different pocket than majority of like what was happening. So
Right, right. Now, I personally remember you from Clubhouse, and I remember your voice. It was, there were a few people that I loved listening to. It was you, Lady Phoenix, Sursu, and a couple of others, and Black Dave as well, I will say. And you never backed down from like schooling people and just, what was the thing you used to say? Was it, I'm going to keep it spicy or
I'm gonna
funky?
keep it funky.
I love that because I always knew that when you said that, it was on. And I knew that some stuff was going to come after that. But it was really evident to me that you had a history deep in the music space and deep in organizing as well. So I want to understand, what was it that appealed to you about this space? By the time it was 2020, it sounds like you had already been in the space for a couple of years. So what drew you in and what kept you here?
I always tell people that it's actually the people that always kept me here.
Hmm.
Well, at least some of them. And so I met people like Vandal and Lethal Skills way before like any of this ever existed, and both of them are kind of who I consider like pillars of Web3 music, crypto music, whatever you want to call it today. And genuinely speaking, they are some of the most intelligent, honest, giving, and resourceful people I've ever met in my life and pop culture. And so me just observing like what they were doing, I picked up kind of their own values and their thought processes around what the space should be. And that was something that I aligned with. And I also believe that with the commodification, we're talking here on the quote unquote anniversary of like hip hop culture, 50th
Right.
anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a lot kind of navigating the arts and cultural sector. I saw a lot navigating through the music industry. Although I lived on the outskirts of that, I observed all this stuff. And I came here thinking that we could build something very different than these things that I came from. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but I also saw a lot of artists being exploited and extracted from. I saw a lot of communities being exploited and extracted from. And so I knew that whatever I was going to build here couldn't look like that. And kind of talking about Clubhouse, and we can move on from there, is that also on Clubhouse, there weren't a lot of rooms people can go to and ask questions openly and say, hey, I have a stupid question.
Right.
Can I ask this? And there's also a lot of people that were like gatekeeping kind of the information, which is
Yes.
what I saw coming in. Like Vandal and Lethal Skills will share anything with anyone as long as you're not on some weird ish, but like, and so I wanted to create an open space for that, and I couldn't find that even with some of the people that were on Clubhouse at that time. And so a lot of things, but mainly that. So
Yeah, when you talk about the gatekeeping, that is real, and I think it still exists to this day. I think some of the people that came into the space with me, some of them are doing quite well for themselves now, but it's almost like, I don't know, it feels a bit like people get in and then they close the door behind them. And there's so much talent. Like I came here for the art and I'm still here for the art. And I see so much talent, but it's almost like not everybody's getting a fair shake. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, the gatekeeping that exists in this space. I'm certain that I experienced it from the artistic standpoint, but I'm sure that you've seen it with regards to music as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
I always kind of draw forth like names in this conversation because I think it's important to kind of hone in on people like Skrilla and Kanye
Hmm.
Digital, and those are also pillars of kind of crypto music and have paved the way for a lot of cats. And when you talk to them and get beyond the surface level and enter their communities, you'll understand like they're not people who want to gatekeep. They want to bring folks in who actually
Hmm.
can believe in what's happening in this space or ecosystem, community, whatever you want to call it. And so I was just I'm gonna keep it funky with you. I was super disturbed by a lot of the ways people gate kept, and it wasn't even necessary. I worked at art galleries, I worked at museums, like all these things, and I saw the ways in which, especially Black folks, Black women, trans folks, queer folks, disabled folks were readily and overtly shafted out of these spaces. And I'm
Mm.
like, why are we here in crypto, which would soon be called Web3 or in DAOs or NFTs, and we're cherry picking who can exist here and who cannot? And the cherry on top of this whole conversation is that when I saw how people galvanized to make an I don't care who this bothers, I'm gonna say what I say, and I mean it. The way in which people wanted people to be like the white savior or the poster boy of crypto and NFTs when wasn't something he readily believed in, and he said this before. That's something that really bothered me. And the way that
Mm,
people gatekept who would be able to make crypto and money and get resources and be shown at certain galleries and who would not. And it happens today. Like who gets to be the poster child of like AI art or
right.
generative art, and it's always like some cis white person when Black folks have kind of pioneered these creative practices way before even the space existed. And even if it is white folks, it's not the right white folks. And I'm gonna keep it funky. And so that's something that's always disturbed me. And so when I came to the space, it's just my nature. It's not performative, it's some real shit. It's like I'm gonna kick in doors, and if you got a problem with it, have a good day, sir. And so, and I wanted to make sure that people came in, they felt welcome, they felt a sense of belonging, they could learn something, but also that I could learn something, and we can kind of share. Last thing I'll say on this is that I also came up with like Beverly Natus, and she's like a super OG in the social engaged arts, and a
Hmm.
whole bunch of people from this community called ARC. And so they're legacy artists, and they also believe 60s, 70s, 80s. There's like really OG like visual artists and socially engaged folks. They believed in all these things way before any of this internet stuff existed. And so I take from them the values and the ideas around cooperative practices and creative practices and how we can actually build communities of folks who are socially engaged and really think about what does that actually look like in Web3. And that means that we don't gatekeep the real
Right.
shit. We don't gatekeep culture. We don't gatekeep who gets to exist here and who doesn't unless they actually don't really belong here. So,
Right, right.
end of
I mean,
story.
I love that. And I know that collective ownership and all of that is very important to you. I'd love for you to expand a little bit on how we can use blockchain to foster collective ownership. Um,
I always say that technology is a vehicle, and I think it's not just a technology that will make way for us to engage around conversations and actually put into practice this idea around collective practices or ownership. It really takes people power in ourselves to edge these conversations out and really think about how we exist with these practices, because at this moment we talk about ownership but not for real. And so it's we're going to really need some bodies on the front line to really have these conversations. And I know that blockchain technology enables us to share resources, we can split contracts, we can do all of these things, but at the end of the day, behind the code there's always a person behind the code. And so how do we actually center the human experience in these conversations around ownership, but also talking about Black folks and our collective legacy? What does it actually mean to like own something as Indigenous folks? That the idea of ownership is also something that bothers me, but I know in the spectrum of art history and the legacy of the white art canon, we have to own something
right.
in respect to our own history, because we've historically been the people who have been owned, if that makes sense. And so it's something
Absolutely.
that's a conversation that I battle with damn near every day. So
Oh, I'm right there with you in terms of how culture represents itself on the blockchain, what we're doing with it, who's getting to use it. All of those things I think are really important questions that we need to answer, I think, before we move forward and before we onboard that next billion or million or whatever the buzzword is that they're using in terms of bringing more people into the space. Your focus, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're deep into hip hop and music. And I wanted to ask because I've seen so many attempts to make music NFTs a thing. I've always thought that the music industry is something that definitely needs to be shaken up and disrupted. How do you see Web3 changing the music industry, or can it? Who's doing it right in the space, and how do you think we can use this technology to really disrupt the music industry?
I'm gonna keep it funky again. The music industry is working as it should. There was actually an article put out the other day around these execs crying about the industry is down and we can't make pop stars anymore. And then there was another article about like, labels are making record numbers. So there's all these like narratives around the music industry. At the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, I don't believe in reform in any respect. I don't believe in reforming the education system. I don't believe in reforming the nonprofit industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, any of that, because all these systems are working in tandem with white supremacy and all these things, and it's working as it should. And so if we really believe in building something much different than the current music industry today and building new frameworks and narratives, that means that we either have to dismantle it or we have to divest from it and really collectively mind hive together and look at the practices of independent artists from across the globe and mine those behaviors and best practices and also scenes. And like Foro do Aisho in Brazil, they built a whole entire network of collective housing for artists, and universities, they have their own bank, and they work collectively to build one of the largest rock festivals in the world. And so I look at people like Felipe Altenfelder, who's the homie, and he with his folks built these things. And so we have the frameworks and all these things that already exist. We have a history of cooperative arts. I talk about Beverly Natus all the time. I talk about Meg Hutchinson, who's a good friend of mine, and all these other folks that I'm in community with. They've already built these cooperative creative practices. We just need to look back in history and mind those things and really think about what we actually want here. Do we want vulture capitalism, which actually only serves cis white men at the end of the day? Or do we actually want to build something very different than the music industry, which historically has been? We can look at race records or the Chitlin circuit, which many Black folks had to resort to because they couldn't go on the road to quote unquote traditional white venues without getting harassed or stalked or etc. And so I look at Connie Digital, I look at Vandal and Skrilla and DJ Lethal Skills and Latasha, shout out, and like all these other people who have paved the way for many artists across the globe to exist here. But we need to take a step back and take inventory and ask ourselves what we actually want here. And in this market,
I actually agree with you in that I don't know that I think we can just slap a new technology upon the existing industry the way that it stands now and think that that will solve the problems. I am actually more in favor of just doing something completely different. Is that something that you think we can leverage blockchain to do?
I thought that's what we're doing. I'm slightly being sarcastic, but I'm slightly being honest. I thought that's what we're doing when, Connie Digital and like all these cats started pushing out these NFTs and really thinking differently about how they as artists can exist here. I thought that's what we were doing. I thought that's what we were doing when Latasha pushed out that video and literally annihilated the whole entire ecosystem in a good way. And really, I can put my video out, which was phenomenal and like brilliant, and make a substantial amount of money and support my own creative practice. Now we're getting away from that because there's this whole conversation about why more artists in the NFT space on Spotify. Like Spotify pays like 0.00 whatever 3 cents. Is that the model we're actually trying to push to artists in this space? That your art is worth 0.00 whatever 3 cents. It's kind of wild to me. And so we can't reform the current music industry. It's been around for decades. It has a history of exploitation and extraction that's visible, it's archived, it's written down in books and academia and all these things that we can research. So why are we sitting here pandering and thinking that we can actually reform any of that? We can build something different, but it takes infrastructure, it takes brilliance, it takes Black brilliance, let's be honest. It takes creativity, it takes hard work and discipline. And I'm not sure that many people are ready to have that real conversation.
So then what do we do in the meantime?
I don't know what other people are doing, but what I can say is the people that I'm in community with, I'm seeing folks putting out their music the way that they see fit. For me personally, I believe that I have the ability to build some of this infrastructure, and it doesn't mean you need another platform. We don't need another platform. We need more tools. We need more infrastructure. We need festivals. We need more vehicles for artists to support themselves, because selling music NFTs, especially in the current market, is not sustainable for a lot of people. We see certain artists, they get 10, 20, 30, $40,000 on their music NFTs, but that's not everybody. I'm telling
Right.
you, many artists are struggling right now. And
Yeah.
so where are grants? Where are the Ethereum Foundation and Near Foundation, all these foundations that claim to support artists? Where are they putting their money up? You can't just support devs. And I love my devs out there. They're always on the front line, but we also have to support builders like myself and yourself. We have to support creatives. We have to support Black and brown folks, folks who put their bodies on the front line to build the infrastructure. And it's not just about development of the technology layer of the space.
Proof of Culture is brought to you in part by Zora, the place to bring your imagination on chain. Visit Zora.co to get started. Connect, click, create. And now back to our interview. I love that you're a massive advocate for the artists. And I love that because I don't think that many people are, I think they talk about it, but they're not really advocating for artists in the way that you are. I know that you maybe just talk a little bit about, you were involved in the Metaverse Music Festival?
Yeah, I actually, me, Lindsay with an E, who's one of my closest friends, Mighty My, which is Mighty 33, and My, they're all like artists and creatives themselves, and a whole horde of other people erected the Metaverse Music Festival a few years ago, and that was one of the largest collective events that occurred like in that space, in this space. So
Yeah, talk to me about the planning that went into that and your involvement and just is that coming back or is that like a one shot thing?
oh Lord, it's gonna get spicy up in here. So a bunch of us were on Token Smart and the Mighty Mice show, which at the time, a lot of us people have been in the space for a long time. Like that was like our gathering space there, and Work in Progress or WIP, which is the longest meetup in the metaverse. And so we all were in there, and Mighty Mai were like, we should throw a festival, and everybody's like, yeah, let's do it. And so everybody just kind of collectively and magically came together, and we didn't know what we were doing because at the time, Crypto Voxels, now it's called Voxels, Decentraland, like all these other metaverses, their technology was janky as heck. Like, good luck fitting like mad people into a space and it not crashing. But we were destined to figure out what we're gonna do, and so we all got together. And so I'm like, we gotta meet every week on Wednesday, and so we just ended up meeting every week. We Mighty Mighty would record. We'd had a website where we had all the notes people could look up. We were regularly organizing in Discord. All this was organized in Discord and email, and so we reached out to all the artists that we knew, like Connie Digital, all these cats. Actually, a bunch of them were already performing at Decentraland. They had another name, and I'll get to this in a second. I'll make this a long story short.
Take your time.
They had a stage at this festival in Decentraland, and you'll get to where I'm getting to in a second. And so I think it was a weekend before they'd had this festival, and we had our own Metaverse Music Festival stage, thanks to the homies, and they helped organize that, and it was incredible. It was called this, I believe, the Smash Stage, aka Metaverse Music Festival stage. It was like all the OGs of crypto music that performed. It was incredible,
Nice.
fire sets, and so people came together to support that. But along the way, we had people that did all kinds of crazy stuff to like circumvent what we're trying to do. And this is people from every corner of the ecosystem, but a very prominent, well-known like music platform in the space. We're supposed to like team up with us, and they're like, F y'all, we're gonna do our own thing. Nobody went to that. It's because everybody at our festival is everybody in the space. And so we were like, we're not going to that. We're going to show you. So nobody went to that party. And so we had people from Emanate. And so we had all these people for 72 hours straight do a stage or do an event or set up an art gallery or set up an interactive art event or whatever people wanted to do. They were invited to come in and like do that thing. We just put it on a schedule, which was a hot mess on Miro. If anybody wants to see it, I'm happy to like send you the link. But Lindsay would think so 72 hours straight of all these events happening. And I can't name all the people because there's literally hundreds of artists, devs, builders from we had every metaverse like represented. We had Altspace VR, we had Decentraland, we had all these things. And so we ran that for the first year. It was messily beautiful, chaotically beautiful, and it was amazing. We had We Are the Red Stars do the finale, and it was crazy. fast forward the next year, so we're on year two.
Hmm.
Um, Centraland decides that they want to name their festival, that they had a whole different name, to the Metaverse Music Festival. Same font, damn near same logo, um,
Wow.
similar format, and these are people that have millions of dollars. Um,
Right.
People that know me, I went ham on them, and so did a lot of people in our community. But I was readily disappointed, and this is where my whole energy in the space shifted. They literally attempted to like steamroll us. They had Metaverse Music Festival, Paris Hilton, like all these like big names, not even aligned with the space. Although Paris is in the space, but like that's a whole nother story for another day. And so we had negotiations with them in Zoom, and they can come fight me for saying this. I don't care. Y'all know I'm about that life. and so and so we had like a few negotiations with them in Zoom. They're like, we're not changing the name, it's too late, but we'll put your name in the PR and say that you're doing this event. I was like, hell no. Let me tell you,
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. So you guys came up with the Metaverse Music Festival,
yes, it was something. Yes,
and then they decided to name theirs the same exact thing.
yes.
Wow.
And their position was that they want to align their branding with all the Metaverse Fashion Week and like all these other things. I'm like, we already had the name. We even had a stage at your first event, and you want to like, it's just
Wow.
culturally y'all hella off, and it's not going to work for me. And so myself and some other people, we went into the Zoom with them, and we had these quote unquote negotiations. And people know me, I'm cool, but like when I'm in the negotiation room, when I'm like boxing with people, like just sit on the side. And so they were on some nonsense, some BS, and I knew that they were trying to be like politically correct and trying to play games. And so I ultimately we had two choices. Like we can get the name trademarked. The culture that we come from, and we'll talk about it later. I don't care about the law. I don't care to interface with legal stuff, but this really changed my mind about how I existed in this space, who I rock with, and
Right.
that this whole incident with Decentraland. And I had some kind of goings on with some of their DAO members, and it just really made me, I'm gonna keep it on, be very honest with you, disgruntled. And a lot of us left the space for several months and did not even talk to each other after this. That's how
Wow.
bad it was behind the scenes. And so Decentraland tried to pull some excuse me, some fuck shit. And so they ended up having the Metaverse Music Festival, attempting to steamroll us. We still had our event. It was kind of disjointed because we were all in opposition with some of us because
Hmm.
ourselves, because I was like, let's get the name trademark. Like, I know we culturally don't believe in that shit, but honestly, like, we have a lot of legs to stand on that we actually created this thing. It was
Right.
ours collectively, and whatever we do with it is what we do with it. And people didn't want to pony up the money except for a few people. And so, shout out to the lawyer that I was talking to, and he was hella cool, which most Web3 lawyers are not. But yeah, so it just caused a lot of dismay and chaos. And shout out to the people who stayed or whatever. But that whole conversation caused a lot of drama and negative energy, and folks started, yeah, it was horrible.
So were you required to change the name of your festival?
No, they made quote unquote suggestions. Their remedy is that they'll put our name in the PR press, and they couldn't change the name. They could have, but they chose not to. And we battled heavy, and I say we as a collective effort battled them heavy in this like Zoom call. So they didn't make that request, but I knew they probably would eventually would have done that. But I'm gonna tell you straight up, no chaser. If people know me. I'm not doing shit that I don't want to do, and that's something that was not happening. We worked so hard for Metaverse Music Festival to even exist, and that
Right.
what it culturally represents in the space. It's much bigger than the fuck shit happening at Decentraland's foundation or their corporate offices in whatever country. And so I wasn't changing that shit. Come sue me, like, and so, and so that's the answer to that question.
That's a hell of a story, man. I didn't know that, so it's good to air it out a little bit. I guess some time ago, you were a founder of an organization called Culture Fit that paired creatives with resources, etc. And it just really, as you were talking just now, I'm thinking about the ethos of transparency and sharing that we say Web3 is about, but I'm not seeing it. Are there any thoughts that you have about bringing culture fix into Web3? Is it still happening? And is there a way to just bring that over so that it can be a resource for artists that are here as well?
Yeah, so Nora and I actually started Culture Fix several years ago, a very long time ago, before I was knee deep in Web3. Calling her a close friend is kind of like an understatement. She's like a sister to me, a family member. And so we started Culture Fix. We met randomly on Twitter via this conference. And Nora and I were like, oh, these rest of these people, I don't know about them, but I think we align and we both like hip hop culture. We're both into like global stuff, like let's connect. And so a few tweets later, we just got on the phone. We connected and we built Culture Fix together, this global cultural network that you with a bunch of people that use social impact as a vehicle for music and art and culture as a vehicle for like social change and social impact. And so Nora and I had built that over time. We had weekly Twitter chats when it was like the thing, and we were doing events and all this other kind of cool stuff in IRL. Nora actually left Culture Fix quite a few years ago, and so
Mm,
it's kind of like going to school and doing some other stuff and taking care of I had some health issues at the time. And
mhm.
so Nora actually has carried on the torch and continues to do like programming. But what I will say is that Nora's kind of a pillar, and like it's hard for me to like describe what she is to me, but I was described maybe as a pillar, somebody who her and I share very similar values and kind of outlook on life. And so I've always brought the values of Culture Fix and what I learned being in community with Nora all these years. I've always brought that with me where whatever project I'm working on, whatever thing I'm doing, Nora's always with me, and so is Culture Fix, because Culture Fix is so tied into both of our identities as people and like who we are and like what we believe in. That's what made Culture Fix,
Yeah.
as well as people in our community. And so whatever I'm doing now, whatever I've been doing has been Culture Fix ID always.
But no plans to like make it a Web3 thing.
I think Nora and I have over the years, like I've talked to her about like crypto and all this other stuff. And like Nora works with a bunch of artists from across the globe, but mainly is working with Imaya Baga from Nigeria. And she runs a label and she does all the things. And so, and she also puts a lot of batteries in the backs of creatives across the globe. And so I want Nora to be in the space, but also I know at this current point where Web3 is, Nora can bring so much to it, but I'm
Mm.
also aware of the energy that exists here, and I'll box anybody for Nora. So I'm very cautious about bringing certain people into the space, and it's in the current state that it is. And so it'll have to be the proper thing for
Right.
Nora and what's in alignment with her and like the things that she's doing. But I'd love
Mhm.
to see Nora and Culture Fix in the space at some point. So
Awesome. Well, let me know when that happens. I think there's so much alignment there with that and with what you're doing and what I'm attempting to do with the blockchain that it would just be so great to see other people with the same kind of belief system and ethos in the space as well. Um, y- you've been very vocal about the existing music platforms and how they treat artists and why they're probably not beneficial for artists, particularly music artists. I'm wondering what you think the promise of Web3 is, particularly for musical artists of color.
I believe that this space offers artists, if nothing else, an opportunity to build belonging with each other in ways that we don't see in the traditional music industry, and not just with each other, but also people who are quote unquote fans or supporters or your would be collectors. And so, this symbiotic kind of community that exists here, it doesn't really look like this outside of the underground hip hop scene or underground punk scenes, rock scenes, or independent kind of cultures that exist across the globe. Like you won't see this in traditional music industry. It's like I'm gonna say hi to y'all on Instagram. You better give me a million likes, and it yeah, and or buy this thing, and that's it. Like there's no kind of reciprocation between or that exists in that relationship. And so what does it actually look like to build this symbiotic kind of relationship with the people that you're in community with or the people that would be in your community, and what does that look like to build these kind of circles of folks? Not everybody's going to be a friend, as my mother would say. But
Right,
like
right.
but everybody can be your supporter, everybody can be your collector, and that needs to look very different here because we shouldn't be enforcing vulture capitalism or consumerism. Like I think we should be looking at how do we build these relationships where it's reciprocal, where we're sharing, where we're encouraging folks to support each other in many different ways that it currently exists in the market. And so, but I also think the technology piece is that we talk about ownership. However, just the idea of like being able to be able to split between artists that you're collaborating with, for me, at least in the beginning, was revolutionary, because oftentimes if anybody sat in a music studio, having to go chase people for like split sheets, if you don't do it in the studio, which I highly recommend, against like, you're in the studio, get your split sheet signed while everybody's there, like, please. And so splitting it on chain, not having to chase after anybody.
Right.
The idea of royalties is something that I agree with NFT royalties, but I don't agree with the royalty system that exists in the music industry. How can we redefine like the tools and build the tools that we actually need to amplify, build, and hold space for creators, especially Black and Brown folks, folks from diaspora? We look at Nigeria as, Afrobeats, the explosion of that, but the reality is that hip hop community there has often been like steamrolled. It's
Mm,
thriving, but we can look at Ghana, we can look at South Africa. There are whole entire countries of and folks in diaspora that can use this technology and use the type of ways that we build community here, at least those that do it for real, and really bring these folks in and onboard them into a culture that has a web of care, a culture that really centers the human experience, a culture that is not exploitive and extractive. I want
mm,
artists to come into like Web3, and if you want to make country music, if you want to make punk rock music, that's infused with hip hop or whatever, or a new genre that you want to create or do experimental stuff, or align that with like visuals or interactive art projects, or something like Heaven Computer, which has this wild like art NFT thing that she set up. And so whatever you want to do as an artist and creative, you should be able to come here and we can embrace like that creative practice, whatever that is. And so I want to encourage folks from the continent, from the diaspora, to like come into the space. And even if people don't get it at the moment, historically, we need to put the stuff on chain and really experiment and push ourselves to push out the creative practice we want to push out, because the traditional music industry and the radio, they don't care about that crap. If you're
right.
not at a top 100 or engaging that formula or doing pop music or whatever, the radio, if you're not paying $100,000 or like pushing out bread to get your stuff there, they don't really care. And if
Yeah.
they like, they're just taking your money. And so can we care about these different creative practices and embrace that? Can we embrace Afrobeat without the S? I love Nigerian psychedelic funk music. I love that so much. Can we have our Black country music? Because country music is Black. Like, let's keep it funky. Can
Thank
we
you.
can we have grime? Can we bring back all these creative practices that we've lost because the music industry said it wasn't worth anything? And so I believe that if nothing else, this space can offer a vessel for artists to really experiment and thrive and really think about, who do I actually want to be, instead of being something that the industry wants me to be, and really embrace that true essence of the underground culture wherever you are in the world.
Amen to that. Let me switch gears a little bit, because you touched on this before, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart, particularly in this space. Is how does one build true community here? Because I feel as though some of us have a certain view of what community is and what community should be. And then other people have an idea that community is just, let's jump into a Discord and talk about our PFPs and exclude everybody else. So talk to me a little bit about, how does one build true community in this space? Because I think that is a big selling point as well for Web3. There's a lot of talk about communities and how we're going to do things a little differently in this space. So maybe share a little bit about your thoughts on that.
As dysfunctional as my family was, at the end of the day, what I can say is I was able to experience what it meant to be raised by a village, what it meant to have tons of people from across the globe, from different experiences, from different walks of life, different communities, and this smorgasbord of people, this buffet of people, really pour into me as like a human being, as a child. I also remember a lot of these folks like pouring into me too. And so I think ultimately community is not just being in a Discord. It's something that you can't replicate, or it's a feeling, you know what I mean? It's an aura. And so in Web3, when I'm with Vandal, even in digital spaces or like the metaverse stuff, when we're at the WIP meetup on Thursdays at 12 o'clock noon PT, when you're there, you feel a certain kind of energy. Even though I'm not in the same room with them, I'm at home on my weird computer. It's the energy that you feel. But if I want to give tangible ways in which people can be in community with each other, first of all, like, do you support folks? Do you show up for them? Do you hold space for them? It's not just about buying their NFT. Are you having conversations? Black Dave has the best chat in this space, and I stake my reputation on that. Why? Because people are constantly etching out best practices or thinking about, oh, I got a new idea. What do you guys think about this? Or, oh, I saw this funny thing on the internet. Check this out. It's a certain energy that Black Dave chat, like nobody can replicate that. And I'm in a billion chats across Discord, whatever. The same thing with Radar, which is a DAO that I'm heavily involved in. It's a certain energy that exists in there. We collectively believe in these values. We collectively believe in this thing that we're building together. Feel free to pop in when you can. And if you can't, we still hold space for you. Here's how you can get involved, and like presenting the opportunity for people to come in and feel belonging, come in to collectively do whatever the thing is. And I think that piece is key. Like, are we inviting folks in, or are we just creating these vessels for ourselves to like talk at the wall? Like, are we building belonging? How does it feel to like hold space for other people, and those people to hold space for me, and it be seamless and not something that feels forced? And so
Right.
there's, if you go on LinkedIn, community manager, LinkedIn, all these people have all these like formulas and things about building communities, but I stake my reputation about what I'm going to say. Most of these people and these big brands know nothing about building community, because at the end of the day, people that I'm in deep community with versus people that I'm just in community with, I'm willing to put my body on the line for those people that I'm in deep community with. And that's just from like organizing work. Ask yourself that. Are you willing to put your digital body on the line to hold space for them? Because when Metaverse Music Festival imploded, I saw very clearly who I was in community with and who I was not. But I also saw people who couldn't be in community with because they didn't want to risk their reputations or mess with their collectors or not get the grant from DCL DAO or like whatever. And I saw very clearly what it meant to be in Web3. And I'll land here and say this. Web3, because of the historical context, because of the revolutionary kind of framework that it was built upon, and the people who carved out the trenches for us to exist here, our bodies, our presence here is political. And so if you're not willing to put your body on the line for me politically, or you're not willing to put your body on the line for me, just period, I don't know that we're actually in deep community with each other. We might be in community with each other because if anybody will come up and support you, I will, because you're creative, you're in the space, and you're trying to figure it out. But deep community, I'm willing to put my body on the line for you to make it happen, and I will cuss anybody out. And so, it's we have to explore all these things, and so that's my answer to that.
Man, that was a sermon in and of itself. I love it, because I have often said that, the brands are coming in, they have all the money, but they don't know anything about community. And you're absolutely right. If you go on LinkedIn, everybody's either hiring for a community person or claiming that they know how to build communities, but they're really not doing all of the things that you mentioned. They're not holding space. They're not focusing on making people feel wanted or accepted in those spaces. It's really just another vehicle to make money. And I think that is going to be a huge problem in this space moving forward. It already is, but I think as more brands move into the space with their massive audiences, I think it's going to be problematic.
Yeah, it's a huge problem now. And I'll say in response to that quickly is that there are a lot of brands who are like, community, here's all this money we have for grants and incubators and all these things. When you look at the dotted line and you read those contracts, and so when you read these contracts of all these brands and communities talking about that they believe in this community in Web3, read those contracts, and most of them might say, we own your brand. And all these brands are coming in here trying to sell us and run game on us all day, every single day. But the thing is, and I'll be hella honest here, my parents were from the streets. A lot of the people that were in my village, they're former drug addicts and pimps and drug dealers and all these things. And so the last person you're gonna run game on is me. And so I can smell you from a mile away. People are super naive in the space and they think that these brands are here to support artists, all these things. And there are a few exceptions, don't get me wrong, but the majority of them who come here, they understand that there's a lot of resources here. But like these brands selling us this game, it's crazy to me to watch that.
2 more questions for you. What would you do in the space if you had unlimited resources?
Even if I don't have resources, I'm gonna still do something. Everybody knows that. If I had unlimited resources, I would love to build a creative suite for artists, and that include a UBI protocol, so universal basic income, and make sure that all these foundations, Ethereum Foundation, Near Foundation, all these foundations talking about that they actually care about artists and all this other stuff, they actually pony up $100 million. They actually pony up $1 billion to actually pour into the creatives and builders and people who can build infrastructure and build the festivals and build the legal clinics for artists and creatives in the space. Because the devs, like, shout out to them, but it's the creatives and builders and the artists who actually put a battery on the back, and we're onboarding hundreds of thousands of people into the space, into what you see right now. And so I believe if we have the infrastructure, we can begin to pull people in from across industries, whether it's fashion, music, film, which I think is a great opportunity. There's tons of other people across the globe that I see that are building incredible like infrastructure and all this other stuff. But we need to pull these folks in, especially Black, brown, queer, and trans folks, because one thing I know best is that we're the people who never had the resource. We're the people that never had the money, but we've always made something out of no way. Hip hop was born out of us having no resources. Rock was born out of us having no resources. Dance music, Black folks music, all this stuff was born out of no resource. And look what we have today. While hip hop may be commodified, that doesn't speak to the whole entire community of hip hop and what's happening across the globe. We have the largest hip hop festivals being thrown in Colombia, and we have Hip Hop Camp in I think it's Europe. And so we have all these things happening because we actually believed in building something, and we just did the work. We didn't maybe know what was going to happen. Cool Herc and Cindy Campbell didn't. The folks at 123 and the Black Spades didn't.
Yes.
But they built it. And so what can we do having foresight of those kind of cultures and our trajectory, like Black excellence and creative practices? What can we do knowing we have the foresight to look back at that history? What can we do knowing we have all these historical context and build something in Web3 that represents the best of all of that? And so for me, to wrap up, is that if I had all the funding, resources, and backing in the world, I'd continue to build festivals, mainly because I enjoy the punishment of planning them. But we need world stages to put Web3 artists on, and it can't be just the Coachellas or Lollapaloozas, although there's a humongous.
You mentioned UBI, and so I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that you are not a fan of WorldCoin.
I absolutely hate WorldCoin. It is extractive, it is problematic, it is disgusting. So if that's what we're trying to build in the space, Friend Tech, which is where they're trading people, and that's weird as hell to me. It's kind of like BitClout. I don't resonate with any of that. It's supposed to be revolutionary technology, and we believe in all these things. Why are we building this crap?
Yeah, it's problematic on a number of levels.
Yeah, it's neo-colonization. I can't.
Okay, final question, Natalie. Tell us what culture means to you.
That's a good question. For me, that's a good question. Culture is a lot of things. I think culture predominantly is how we express ourselves. I always talk about revolutionary technologies and Black futurism. Like, that's, for me, kind of culture. And a lot of the stuff that we're doing today is what people in the 70s were talking about in terms of like Black futurism. It's our history, our collective history. It's our oral history. Culture is, especially in Web3, is what are we putting out into space, because what we do today is going to be written down in history. Culture is who we are as human beings, and I know that some of y'all don't have culture in Web3. That's not my problem. Culture is culture is, I'm being funny. Culture is a lot of things, but predominantly culture is how we communicate as human beings, how we communicate our folk ways, all those things. So and more. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's a good answer. Well, I could literally talk to you all day. And you had some of the best answers. I mean, I'm so excited to edit this one because I just think this is gonna knock the socks off a lot of people. But I want to just thank you for sharing your insights and your time for the podcast, but also just everything that you've shared. Like I said, since I came into this space, you have been one of the most passionate voices that I've heard when it comes to inclusion and representation. I mean, and just education as well. And so I just want to say thank you and encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, man. It's so needed in this space, especially as it's changing so quickly. 2 years ago, we were saying how early it is, and we're still early, but I definitely feel like the space needs people like you. So however I could help or support in anything that you're doing, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know.
Thank you for having me, and likewise the open door policy.
Of course, my sister. Enjoy the rest of your Friday then.
I will try.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Proof of Culture. Your support really means the world, and you're helping to bring our message to a broader audience. This podcast is written and produced by yours truly. Don't forget, the conversation doesn't end here. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, or any suggestions that you might have. Reach out to me on Twitter at Sian Morson. That's SIANMORSON. And be sure to follow the podcast at proofofcult_pod. Your feedback and engagement really makes a difference and helps us to shape our journey. If you enjoyed today's episode and you found it enlightening, please share it with friends, colleagues, or anyone you know who might be eager to learn more about the cultural landscape in Web3. Your support in spreading the word is invaluable in helping us to grow our community. Our theme songs are A Long Way by Serge Pavkin Music and Titanium by Elysia Beats. Be sure to tune into our next episode where we'll continue to dive deeper into the fascinating facets of culture in Web3. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep cultivating your own proof of culture.